What is up, everybody? Well, yet another month has now peeled off of the calendar of 2025. We are officially in September. Fall and spooky season is right around the corner. Oh my god, I'm so ready for it. But now we got to talk about all of the brand new releases that I saw in August of 2025, of which I was able to check out 10 brand new releases. And overall, pretty solid month. We definitely had a few movies I did not care for. We had one that I absolutely loved, and we had quite a few that I thought were good to very good that hopefully you guys all got a chance to check out too. So as I go throughout this list, let me know your thoughts on the films that you saw. If there's some on here that you had a very different experience with, let me know down below. If there's a number of films that I do not cover this month that you actually think I would really enjoy, please give me those suggestions. And with that being said, let's kick this bitch off with number 10. And number 10 for me is a movie that honestly was not on my radar whatsoever. It was that first weekend after the summer movie season officially stopped, and so there was that little lull that we get usually for 1 or 2 weeks where no really substantial movies start to come out until they start to push the fall season films. And so I just happened to look at Fandango, see what were the new films, and one stood out to me that was called Trust, starring Sophie Turner, who a lot of people know from Game of Thrones most notably. And I thought this movie was just one of the most baffling scripts that I've seen in a long time, such a weird execution of ideas, and a movie that if you get hung up whatsoever on logic, it's going to drive you up a fucking wall. And essentially what Trust is about is you have Sophie Turner, who is playing this very huge movie star, this A-list celebrity, who suddenly has her iCloud account hacked and a bunch of lewd pictures are released, as well as one of her holding a positive pregnancy test. And suddenly all the tabloids are speculating on who the father is going to be. And very quickly, right after this introduction, you get told the truth that the father of her soon-to-be child is actually the significantly older co-star of this show that she is famous for. And then the co-star, who is an older guy who does not want his career to be tanked by this, sets forth this plan to essentially hire a hitman to go and take her out, including her unborn baby, so that the problem will go away and the truth will never be revealed. That seems like a pretty interesting setup for the film, but that's not the fucking movie you're watching. Essentially, Sophie Turner goes to this little cottage in the middle of nowhere to get away from all of the celebrity bullshit, and she, through a weird series of events, has a home invasion and gets locked in this fucking room with a water heater and spends the rest of the movie trying to escape this room. Which leaves you just absolutely baffled at what the fuck was all this 25 minutes of setup if we're not going to be watching that movie. You could have just had Sophie Turner be anybody stuck in any house that somebody breaks into and the fucking doorknob falls off and she's stuck in this room, and that's your movie. It's baffling. It's absolutely baffling, and it's maddening that they actually had a pretty decent, intriguing setup that had plenty of places to go, whether you're going to comment on absent fathers, whether you're going to comment on the patriarchy inside of Hollywood, whether you're going to comment on the media's treatment of people's private lives. Like, there's so many different places you can go. No, we're just going to watch Sophie Turner stuck in a room for 90 minutes. And the logic leaps that they expect you to go along with to buy into this very simple and attempt at a grounded premise is just maddening. I mean, you literally have the setup at first where the reason she's locked in this room, which is basically like a utility room, there's nothing in there but concrete and a water heater and some pipes in the ceiling, is that the doorknob gets broken and half of it falls off into the room that's the bedroom that's attached to this room, and the other half falls into the utility room that she's into. And anybody who has ever put a doorknob onto a door, switched a doorknob out, had a doorknob issue, you don't just get locked into a fucking room that way. You still can stick the doorknob in and function it as a doorknob. So that doesn't work. They also clearly establish very early on in this premise that she has a fully charged, functioning iPhone just inside of the next room. And when the doorknob is fallen through, she's got a hole this fucking big in the door. And at no point in the movie do they ever explain why she can't just go, hey, iPhone, call emergency services and get me the fuck out of here. Make sure I didn't call anybody. But nothing tops the ultimate like ticking clock element this movie goes for, which is that a pipe eventually bursts above her and starts to slowly fill this room with water, despite the fact that it can very easily escape through the door jamb, underneath the door, inside of that giant hole that the doorknob is missing from. Nope, it just turns this little brick room into an indoor swimming pool slowly throughout the movie. The movie was awful. You know, you have Sophie Turner giving it her all. She tries to carry the movie. She is the best thing about it. I mean, she is a very good actress, but everybody else in the movie doesn't really get enough to work with to really support her in that. Even actresses and actors that I love, like Katie Seagal, and just the plot of the movie is baffling. Like, such an interesting setup that goes nowhere. Coming in at number 9 is one that's extremely complicated for me. This is a movie called Jimmy and Stiggs. This is the first release of the horror section, which is the brand new distribution production company that is created by Eli Roth, that is meant to preserve unrated, unfiltered horror movies, keep them away from studio execs that try to water these things down, and just let these independent filmmakers express their voice through a film that is untouched by boardroom meetings, essentially. And everything that this production company stands for, I'm absolutely behind. And it's absolutely born out of the success of things like Terrifier 2 and 3 that would never be able to survive in its existing state if it was to go through an actual studio system. So I do want to see somebody champion this. Eli Roth is certainly a notable name in horror who would get that done. And I look forward to seeing what they do in the future. And even beyond that, Jimmy and Stiggs is a movie that is brought to you by the filmmaker Joe Begos. I really enjoyed his film VFW from a number of years ago. And it is an absolute DIY horror film. It is things that he put together, crafted by hand, mostly shot by himself. I wouldn't be surprised if he even had a part in the editing. This is a movie that is his blood, sweat, and tears, his idea that he made happen from the ground up over like 4 years inside of his own apartment. And that is awesome. That is inspiring. That is something that is a marvel as a movie fan who just is fascinated by the actual process. But unfortunately, the movie itself is not really something that I enjoyed. I could appreciate everything about the filmmaking. There were aspects of the movie that I liked, as far as kind of the goofy charm of the DIY special effects and things like that. The very trippy neon color scheme that he goes for and the lighting. All of that was interesting, but it's a movie that you feel like would have been an incredible 20-minute short, but it's 90 minutes long, and that 90 minutes ends up feeling like 3 hours because it's just the same couple of scenes cycled over and over. A guy being paranoid, talking to himself, a guy lashing out at his best friend for not completely being behind him in this suspicion of an alien invasion, and then a scene of him beating the fuck out of a little practical alien dummy. And it's just that over and over and over again, with a screenplay that has so much overused profanity that it would make Rob Zombie blush. And so it's one of those times where like the movie fan and the movie critic in me are kind of having a little bit of a battle. Like, this is a movie I want to champion. This is a movie that I love what it stands for. I love the process. I would be fascinated to watch a 3-hour documentary on how he was able to make this film, and I would chew up every single second of it. But the overall experience of the finished product was just absolutely not for me. Number 8 is a movie called Witchboard, and this is a film that was actually on my most anticipated films of the year list like 2 years ago. It has been sitting on the shelf and has been avoiding public release for a very long time. And after seeing it, I'm kind of puzzled why. This is obviously not a great film. This is at the bottom 3 of my list. It will certainly be in the bottom chunk of my films for the year, but it's nowhere close to the bottom. And a lot of movies that are going to be housed permanently in my bottom of the year for 2025 are films that had full studio production, full studio marketing, a whole wide theatrical release. They had no shame about putting that out in the public, but a movie like this was hidden that isn't nearly that bad. What first enticed me to this is that it's a film brought to us by Chuck Russell, who is the guy that brought us Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, one of my all-time favorite films, the 1986, maybe? I'm probably getting that date wrong, but the 80s Blob remake that I really enjoy, as well as movies like The Mask, which is a 90s classic and a childhood favorite of mine, and even the Arnold Schwarzenegger film Eraser, which doesn't get a lot of love, but I've always enjoyed. And so I was just curious to see what Chuck Russell still got in him. Does he have another classic? This is also a film that's a remake of an 80s film that I honestly have never seen, but there was so much about this where I'm like, there's potential there for this to be an exciting little return to form, or at least just a cool little thing to see for those of us Chuck Russell fans. And what I will say is that there is an element to this film that could have been an awesome, fascinating movie that really kind of flips the witch genre, subgenre rather, on its head. There's a section of the movie where, essentially this Witchboard is like your item that is the catalyst for a curse, the catalyst for all these terrible accidents. The more that the lead actress messes with it to foresee her future or to try to gain certain things, somebody close to her befalls this very ill fate. And there was a part in the movie where her and the witch from like the 1600s that created and cursed this Witchboard actually swap bodies. And it's only a plot element for like the back third of the film, when that right there to me was the entire concept of a really great movie. You have somebody from 2025 get transported back into the 1600s and now has to navigate that time period and also try to navigate a witch hunt that they are the prime suspect for, and have somebody from the 1600s shoot into 2025 and try to navigate modern day stuff while she has all these nefarious plans. Like, somebody make that movie. But that's only a chunk of that. That was a disappointment because that was where my interest really peaked. I do think that there is an attempt to do some pretty cool kills here, but there's a lot of CGI gore at play, so kind of takes the wind out of the sails whenever you see that. And aside from that, there's a lot of cliches and tropes, and most of the actors, with the exception of Jamie Campbell Bower, who's playing one of the lead villains here, he's the one who played Vecna in the most recent season of Stranger Things, which was like, 10 years ago now? He does a great job. Everybody else just kind of is okay. So it's a movie that is very passable. I would not pay to go see it in the theaters. I would not drop a bunch of money to watch it on streaming. But if it ends up on a free streaming service or you can rent it for a couple of bucks, I actually had a halfway decent time with it. It is far from the worst of the year to be a movie that seemingly the studio was like trying to bury as much as possible, but certainly was not a return to form for Chuck Russell that I was hoping for. Coming in at number 7 is a movie called Primitive War. Now, this was released to theaters. It had extremely limited showtimes around me, so I was not able to see it in theaters, but luckily I was provided a digital screener to be able to check this out last night before I filmed this list. And unfortunately, I have to be honest, I think my experience with that digital screener did damper my enjoyment of this film. And that is just an unfortunate reality sometimes when you get these digital screeners. For those that don't have an experience watching them, sometimes they are in a little bit lower video quality than you would like. Sometimes they have watermarks that are very much obscuring a lot of the picture. This is one that didn't just have a watermark, it had in bold white letters, screener copy across the entire bottom third of the movie. And so it was always impeding what I could see. There's very few moments in the film where they have subtitles, but the times that they do, it was subtitles that was underneath the screener copy text, so I couldn't even read what the fuck these characters were saying. And unfortunately, the audio mixing of this screener was pretty awful, where the dialogue was almost indiscernible, but if you turned it up to be able to hear it, as soon as a gunshot or a grenade or a roar of a dinosaur went off, the fucking walls would rattle with bass. So it was kind of a constant up and down game with me with the remote watching this film. So it's very frustrating, and that's unfortunate. I hate it whenever you get a screener, and it's a very cool opportunity, and for some reason, whoever puts these screeners together just does not think ahead at how a poor experience like this can absolutely affect the critic's experience with the film. So nonetheless, if I had seen this in the theater, had a better experience with it, there's a chance this could have been 1 or 2 spots higher. But as is, this is a Vietnam War film that ends up being like a dinosaur action survival horror film. And the entire premise of this film, I think, is incredible. Like, this is basically, if you've ever watched a Jurassic Park film, and it's like, I really wish I could see a movie like this that's a full-blown hard R. That's kind of what this is. You have a lot of those Vietnam War tropes with all the songs that have been playing in these movies ever since like Forrest Gump, Fortunate Son and things like that. So you do have war violence and a lot of war caricatures with the characters. And then you have a bunch of dinosaurs eating and tearing people apart sequences, which are always a lot of fun. The biggest Achilles heel with this movie is that it's a very low budget film, and there's moments, mostly at night, where the CGI is somewhat convincing and is effective because they're able to obscure what it actually looks like, and it's more about the suggestion of things. A lot of the sequences in the daytime, or where they're really trying to focus on having a big CGI effect for a dinosaur, it looked pretty awful, at least on the screener that I was watching. It was like PS3 graphic level, and so that took it down quite a bit. I wish I could see a version of this film that actually had a decent budget where they could realize what they're trying to do much better. But the carnage candy was great. There was a number of really tense sequences. I did like just the vibe and the tone of having a Vietnam-style war film, which is already pretty emotionally heavy, and then mixing that with a dinosaur survival film. So I would say to check it out if any of those things interest you, because you might have a better experience watching it than I did. I'll give it this. I had more fun with this than I did Jurassic World Rebirth. Number 6 is going to be The Toxic Avenger, and this is a film that actually was premiered back in 2023 at Fantastic Fest, so I have seen this 2 years ago, and for a while there, it felt like this movie was never going to be released publicly. They really struggled to get distribution. The word that was being tossed around was that it was unreleasable, which to me is like, what the fuck did you expect? It's a trauma film. That's kind of the entire name of the game with them, is a movie that's unreleasable, but they release it anyway. So it was a very odd situation, but nonetheless, Cineverse, who is very closely tied in with the distribution of Terrifier 3, maybe even Terrifier 2, they picked this up, released it unrated to theaters. I don't know how long it's going to be in theaters, but this is a 2023 reimagining of the 1984 flagship Troma Entertainment film that is highly irreverent, highly offensive, highly just, a movie that absolutely breaks all of the taboo rules, even back in 1984, but significantly more so with the way that society is in 2025. And so because of that, you have a movie that in a modern context definitely pushes the envelope in certain aspects, but is a much more palatable experience, is a much more maybe acceptable is the right word movie, where even though they're dubbing it unreleasable, I've seen much more offensive things from other films. This is not one that's going to come out and just absolutely shock and disgust audiences or anything like that. So it's the modern version of what a Troma film can get away with in 2023, which is not a whole lot compared to what they used to. But what I like about this film is that I do like the casting. I do like the performances here. I think it's got a really nice heartbeat throughout it with the main storyline with Peter Dinklage's character. And that's more than you could say for any of the other Toxic Avenger films, even the original one, which I do like. And I think that even though there's a lot of CGI gore at play, it's a fun movie with the hyper-violence and the irreverence and the goofiness, and it's absolutely not for everybody. It is a love-or-hate type film like any Troma film is going to be, but I had a really good time with it. I thought that it was a fun, modernized version of Toxic Avenger. It's really just going to depend on whether or not you prefer having some character and some story work to just a bunch of low-quality irreverence, or if you really think that the intentional bad quality of the Toxic Avenger is a piece of its DNA, and as soon as you try to modernize that or shave off the weird corners or make a presentable version of that concept, you've lost the plot entirely. Depending on where you fall on that is whether you will like or despise this remake, but I had a good time with it. Number 5 is a pretty pleasant surprise for me, and that is The Naked Gun. Now, for those of you that have followed me for a while and caught my 31 on 31 episode from, was it last year, where we did comedy films, I'm really not big on parody or spoof comedies. I can count on a couple of fingers, not even a whole hand, how many I've genuinely enjoyed in my life, and a number of the most prolific ones of all time were at the bottom of my comedy list during that ranking, because I just don't find a lot of it funny. It's just not on my wavelength. And so I was not expecting to really enjoy this film. I had never seen the original Naked Gun films. I still have not seen them, and though I really like Liam Neeson, his post-Taken career has been extreme hit or miss for me. So I was walking into this one just going, okay, well, hopefully it's at least tolerable and not like a cringeworthy 90 minutes. And I'm here to tell you, of the movies that I can say I enjoy from this style of comedy, I can now add one more finger, and it's for this Naked Gun remake, because I think there are a lot of genuinely smart, stupid jokes in this movie. The first 15 minutes or so of this remake is, or a reboot, I guess, whatever you want to call it, was pretty relentless. I mean, it was like laugh after laugh after laugh, and I was like, holy shit, dude, am I going to be laughing this entire movie? Some people actually had that experience where they were like choking on their spit from beginning to end and couldn't even hear half the jokes because the theater was having the same experience. It did eventually wear thin on me. The third act I didn't find to be anywhere near as funny as the first act, and even the second act wasn't as funny as the first act to me, but it started with a bang. There was a number of great jokes, sight gags, references, things like that throughout the film. The plot was goofy and cliched enough to just present a lot of this stuff. I thought the chemistry between Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson was actually pretty good. And I think it's kind of sweet and poetic that they're like a couple now too. And there was a number of things here that just, it was a very carefully calculated style movie like this. It didn't feel like a movie that was just shit out and it's like, let's just do the dumbest thing possible and put no effort into it and people will just laugh. It felt like they really took their time with each individual sequence and tried to have a joke that is right in your face, a joke that's going on in the bathroom, and even a joke that's just in passing, and have 3 attempts to try to hit you with something. And their success rate was pretty damn good here. So even though I was not laughing from beginning to end like a lot of people, from me saying that I enjoyed this film, that's a lot. That's a pretty bold statement coming from somebody like me, where these types of movies are just not my thing. Coming at number 4 is Caught Stealing. This is the latest Darren Aronofsky film, and to me, I didn't really know much about this. I just kind of went to go see it along with the Toxic Avenger because it was the new movie that was out. And I would describe this as Darren Aronofsky trying to make a Guy Ritchie film, which is very interesting because Darren Aronofsky is a filmmaker that certainly has already established a name and a reputation for himself. If I'm not mistaken, I think he's already either been nominated or won a couple of awards. Like, there's a lot of things that he's done that is pretty prolific in the film industry. And so this feels like something you would see from like an up-and-coming filmmaker who just grew up on Guy Ritchie films. But I think it's kind of refreshing to have somebody who is usually very dark and bleak. And I think he even has a lot of biblical allegories in his movies, at least a couple of them that I've seen, to do something very scaled down like this and just try to have fun. I think that that's refreshing. Somebody kind of getting out of the prestige world and being like, I just want to have a fun movie. I just want to kick some ass and have some dark, bleak action and shit like that. So essentially, this is a movie where you have Austin Butler who gets flung inadvertently into this little mob plot where they're trying to find this money, and he gets thrown into it, has no idea why, but suddenly he is tied with a bunch of different criminal organizations and corrupt cops, and there's murders happening, and he's trying to solve all this and figure out how to save him and his love interest, played by Catwoman herself, Zoe Kravitz, and things just keep going wrong. Now, this has the flair and the goofiness and the tonal shifts of a Guy Ritchie film, but is significantly darker, more bleak, more punishing and unforgiving. And that's kind of a double-edged sword. I think that's refreshing to see some very dark stuff happen. It's refreshing to have moments where a movie that's very fun on its surface doesn't have the fear to show moments like this where heroes don't win and where things don't go their way, and now the plot just becomes all the more devastating for them. But at the same time, it makes the tonal shifts very much more extreme, where you're going from something dark and bleak and devastating to now trying to be a little silly and goofy like the trailer is mostly showing you. And I don't know if the tonal shifts completely work. Overall, I had fun with it. I thought the performances were great. I think Austin Butler is an absolute movie star. I love that guy and what he's done so far. Can't wait to see what's next from him. And I would buy this and rewatch this. I actually enjoy this more than a number of Guy Ritchie's actual films that people tend to love. But I do think the tonal shifts are pretty extreme, and it's going to divide people on whether or not it's asking too much of you. Coming at number 3 is going to be Strange Harvest. This is a film that I saw at last year's Fantastic Fest that just now got a limited release from Saban Films. And essentially, this is a mockumentary-style horror film where they're very much trying to recreate that like Netflix documentary experience of things like the Zodiac Killer or the Night Stalker, but they're pushing it much more into a fictional supernatural direction where you have this killer, Mr. Shiny, that has been absent from killing for like 20 years and suddenly starts to pick up the mantle again. And it's a fake documentary interviewing the cops, the investigators, witnesses, victims, that very much convinces you this is a real story. I guarantee you take an average person who loves these type of true crime documentaries and you sit them down and watch this, you'll be more than halfway through the film before they start to pick up on or even ask questions on whether this is real or not. And I think that's the biggest testament to the film, is that Stuart Ortiz, the filmmaker, was able to really faithfully recreate that type of experience while telling his own unique story. And there's something really cool about that. You know, to me, it's just enough of that found footage edge to maintain that tether to reality while also pushing it. But it's in a way that I find to be much more entertaining than your traditional found footage style film, which I'm not generally a big fan of. So I definitely enjoyed this one. It had a very limited release in theaters, so I'm pretty sure it's already out in most, if not all, territories, but keep your eye out for it when it goes to VOD. It's worth your time. Coming in at number 2 is Nobody 2. I was a massive fan of the first Nobody, and I had heard some pretty mixed and negative reviews before this movie actually released that had me a little bit worried, and so maybe because I walked in with lowered expectations for this sequel, I was actually to have a good amount of fun with it. Now, I do think it's a pretty significant drop from the first film, but still a movie that I'm very much entertained by and that I would certainly rewatch. It is much more inherently goofy and silly and tongue-in-cheek than the first film, which I don't think is an upgrade. I actually liked the dark bleakness of the first one with these kind of intentionally dark, humorous moments, where this one is much more overtly an action comedy. And I think what you lose in that is the subverted expectation of having Bob Odenkirk play a role like this, where in the first film, he is such a dark, mean character that has these awkwardly funny moments out of almost irony. And in this one, he's playing much more of a traditional Bob Odenkirk style character that just happens to also kick ass. So I had fun with it. I did laugh a number of times. I thought the action was fun, even when it got overly silly and a little bit convoluted for the grounded type tone they're going for. So it's not a movie that I think measures up to the original. And if they do have enough success to make a third one, I would hope they would kind of shift back towards the tone and the approach of the first one. But I still had fun with it. These types of movies are absolutely my thing. They always have been. Having an actor, even especially one that is more of an unassuming hero like what Bruce Willis was back in the original Die Hard, and having them just absolutely lay waste to a bunch of terrorists or corrupt cops or whatever the villain ends up being. If the action delivers and there's some good amount of gore and carnage candy, it's hard not to please me and put a smile on my face with that type of film. But easily number 1 by a pretty wide margin for me in August was Weapons. This is the new Zach Cregger film. I was a massive fan of Barbarian from a couple of years ago, and so no matter what this guy did, I was going to be there day one with bells on. And Weapons was one of those premises that all I had to hear was the elevator pitch, which is you have at 2:17 in the morning, I believe, you have 17 different children that all went to the same classroom, all get up out of their beds, walk out their front door, and disappear into the darkness. And now the town is left wondering what the hell happened. Like, all you have to do is tell me that. I'm there, totally invested and interested in hearing what fucking mystery you have in store for me. And so this is a movie that actually I really liked when I first saw it, but I've only grown to love it all the more that I've discussed it, the more that I've explored certain things about it and thought about certain things about it and debated and, had certain discussions with other movie fans who both loved it and didn't like it. It's one of those movies that has grown. And so while when I first saw it, I really enjoyed it, I was saying that it's not quite top 5 of the year for me. By the end of the year, it might sneak up into there, because I just really like the story that Zach Cregger crafted here. I think there's a lot of inherent mystery here. When you finally do start to get some of the answers and it tells you what type of movie it actually is, I found it to be a very fresh and subversive take on that subgenre of horror, which we don't typically get very often. Thought the performances were great across the board from, Josh Brolin especially was kind of the standout to me here, as well as the child actor who you really see shine in the final act of the film. The way that they told the film somewhat out of sequence in a sense of it's all POV based, where you just follow each character's individual experience and they barely overlap and something crazy happens and suddenly you shift back in time and see somebody else's perspective before it advances the story just a little bit more. That created so much tension and so much like good frustration that you want to have more answers, but now you got to wait a little bit longer, and he kind of like dangles the carrot in front of you. And especially, actually, even more than Josh Brolin, who I loved, was Amy Madigan, who I love from Uncle Buck as Shanice Kobylowski, absolute icon in that role. Her take here as Aunt Gladys absolutely makes the movie. It's somebody that has kind of taken the horror community by storm with different pictures and, artistry that is tried to recreate her very unique look in her character here. So there's just so much about Weapons that I really love. A movie that is thrilling, entertaining, very genuinely creepy in a number of moments, but also leaves a lot of things for you to unpack. and there's just enough ambiguity there that kind of frustrated me on first watch, and as I continue to discuss it, I kind of value the fact that there's never going to be a concrete answer. It's kind of like, not to compare this quality-wise, but it's like Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, where no matter how long we all debate that movie, there's never a concrete answer. We're all just going to have to take what we take away from it, whatever we interpret things as, and the person sitting next to you is going to get something totally different out of it. And I think that Krager does a great job at building something like that with weapons. So absolutely love this. One of my favorite movies, and certainly one of my favorite horror films of the year, and easily my #1 movie of August 2025. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews, of which you'll see a number of these films. And I'm also going to put a playlist up here for all of my month wrap-up videos that I do at the end of each month of new releases. So please like, share the video, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.